So I was about 14 years old when I decided that what we used to call English literature in Indian schools was going to be basically my area of study and then possibly a professional life. So I got a BA and an MA in English at two different Indian universities, and then I was teaching English at a college which is affiliated with Delhi University. About 3 years into that experience, I began to feel the need for the PhD degree. And there was already a fairly continuous set of connections between Indian universities and American universities. And so it was not a difficult decision to make that I wanted to put out applications.
I knew when I was little, ever since I was little, I knew that I was hoping that I would go and leave where I lived. And it's particularly because the country that I lived in, Yugoslavia, fell apart when I was quite young. And the problem with that was that I was what they call their mixed blood. So half Croatian and half Serbian, and those two countries were at war. So I didn't belong to either one of them. And living in Croatia, with Serbia being perceived as an attacker and was an aggressor in many ways, but it was very complicated as all wars are. I didn't feel at home there. So I feel like this complicated my immigration or emigration experience because I was leaving a place that was partially physically and emotionally to some extent my home. And I had a group of people that I loved and that loved me, but I didn't fully feel that it was my home. So I wanted to leave because of this reason, because I didn't belong there. So I wanted to find a place that I belong, that I can feel that I belong to. And this was, for me, I applied then to university, to Columbia, but I applied particularly well because I love literature and all of that. But I applied also because I wanted to find home somewhere.
So I came to the United States when I was 4 years old, and this was in 1986. My parents were leaving the Iran-Iraq war. Both my parents had gone to college in the US and wanted to return to the US. The war was an opportunity, or the thing that made them come here. And what brought me to Madison was law school. I got accepted to the University of Wisconsin Law School. It was the number one choice where I wanted to go. My dad had gone to school in Wisconsin. My cousin was a professor here, and I just knew this was the place I wanted to be.
I moved to the United States in 2000 after having my medical degree from University of Cairo, Egypt. I wanted to pursue further education in medicine and public health in general and have a great future for myself. I eventually moved to Madison because at that time I had an extended family member who was living in Madison, particularly in Eagle Heights. And I'm going to tell you why I mentioned that Eagle Heights. And I was told that Madison is welcoming, Madison is peaceful.
So I came here as the wife of a postdoc. At the time, I had two young children. And for me, it was something that had happened in my life before, because actually I was the age probably of my son when I first came to the United States with my academic parents for a sabbatical. I did it when I was 8 and again when I was 18. So this was a familiar pattern in my life. However, I had never been to the Midwest. The other two times I was here, I was in Boston, and the Midwest was really unfamiliar to me. So coming to Madison was definitely off the pattern, but I did come here with the intention of being here just for a few years.
So that was Zagreb, Croatia. It was Zagreb, Yugoslavia. And then I think I still have a passport from there, which I always tell people I come from a country that doesn't exist anymore. I was born nowhere. It fell apart soon afterwards. So we lived in communism. I had no idea what any of this was when I was a child. So when people want horror stories from communism, I'm thinking, I don't know, I had grandma and grandpa, and we lived in, yes, there were sometimes shortages of things. The shortage of chocolate was not a good thing. That was really bad. I remember that one as a child.
When we arrived in the US, we went to Buffalo, New York, because my aunt was there. And of course, when you go to another country, you go to whatever city a family member is at. And then when I was 10, we moved to Philadelphia, the outskirts of Philadelphia. My dad had a job there. So of course we were gonna move and relocate to wherever job economic opportunities existed. Growing up, I felt very lonely. I struggled to make friends in school. I didn't fit in as a minority. But those experiences are what made me want to go to law school.
And I was born in Jerusalem. Both my parents were academics. And so I grew up in a very idealistic young state with parents who were very involved and very active, also very involved in the intellectual community. And I think I really was born to sort of be absolutely an Israeli. That was not an option. It's really true that it was more than just being born in Israel.
I was 8 years living in Spain and then moved to Ecuador, and I was there till I was 18. So changes are really hard. When I was in Spain, I was used to it, like people, humor, let's say, the food, everything, the way the things are. And then when we moved to Ecuador, everything was really different because I went from a small city that has mall, movie theater, and things like that, to the Amazon in Ecuador. So there was not a mall at all. Like, it was a really small town, but there was other different things that I at the beginning I didn't appreciate, but with the time I appreciate them. For example, it's the Amazon. So the animals, the plants, trees, all of that, and also, of course, different culture, different food, the fruits, a lot of fruits. In my yard, I had a lemon tree. So lemonade, it was very easy and super delicious to make. So I will say that was kind of like my childhood, the changes.
So initially I grew up in different parts of India. I guess what I would say in terms of, the basic qualities of my life was that it was a settled, urban, middle class kind of existence. My father was a technocrat, my mother was a homemaker. And education was very important for us. So a lot of focus on education. And then, of course, I became an educator myself. So it was, and also a lot of contact with family. I have a very large family on both sides.
I grew up between Sudan and Egypt, surrounded with two identities, two culture, and lots of love. My childhood was filled of lots of family gatherings, lots of love and sense of well-being. Life was not easy where I grew up in Sudan or Egypt, but the challenges and the difficulties that I overcome when I was a child or my teenager or early adulthood shaped me into someone who is resilient and proud who I am right now.
I will say rain.
I brought with me, and I always kept a small statue of Cleopatra, and that is because it reminds me with my parents' words, the things that they saw on me at a very early age, and also I am wearing a traditional Sudanese necklace. This is, we call it the somita. It is worn in a special occasion to resemble also identity, power, and elegance.
Think about growing up in the US, and my mom would play Andean kuros in the house, and we would dance and listen to Persian music. Sarshir is like, I don't know what it is in English, but it reminds me of Iran. Sultanat Qalba, like it's a song called Golden Dreams, and I learned how to play that on the piano.
So it's hard to say that I am needing a lot of memories, in that I really do still am very connected to my culture. And when I go to Israel, I really just go right back to kind of where I left from, and I take in theater and music and food and my family and friends. So it's really kind of, even though I've been here for over 40 years, I have a very live connection with Israel and live connection with my traditions.
It's very hard to find an involuntary memory. So it's not that I heard a song and that reminds me of home. So it's not really, there's no Proustian Madeleine, I eat something. It's so different that there's nothing that I can, that reminds me truly of that place. It's more so that it's seeing a photograph from elementary school, or opening the phone and those memories that pop up, and I see a friend whose face I haven't seen in 10 years. That's where it's an attachment memory.
Yeah.
You know, it's really hard to give advice. I think that actually finding your way in a new country is a very personal path. And some people do it by finding other people, mostly from their own country, and sticking with them. And that helps a lot. And when I first came here, the Israeli community was my probably major connection. On the other hand, what happens when you sort of segregate yourself out, your ability to actually find your path is limited. And so I would say that it would be good to have, really to have those connections and that comfort zone available, but not to exclude yourself from mingling with other people.
You need to be patient with herself. Be kind with yourself. Be gentle with yourself. It's going to be overwhelming at the beginning. It's not going to be easy. It's going to be hard, but it gets easy and easier with time.
In general, I will say to find a community or a hobby that you like to do, and you have to fight for finding your place, because here, for me at least, has been really hard to socialize. I'm a very shy person, and I'm not like I go to the street and say, hi, let's be friends. For me, it's easier when I'm, for example, in a school, in a club, and then we do an activity, and then just a conversation happen.
One thing that I would say, and maybe that's not advice, but maybe it's kind of like motivational speech, is that I think that people who do this, at least there's an interesting story to the life trajectory. There's something that makes you, pushes you to discover who you are as a person, as a human being in your complete specificity, when there's no space and place to hold that identity for you. There's no more, oh, I'm part of this community, I'm part of these, so there are friends, there are people, there's a flag, there's a city, and they hold my identity in a certain way. Well, for me, that was always incomplete, but at least there were benches and buildings and friends who did hold my identity to some extent. There was language that held my identity. So by the movement of coming to a place where I didn't know a single person in New York City or America, so the entire continent was just blank, and I was a blank to the continent, it forced me to really think, who am I? Without the language, without the city, without somebody telling me, you don't seem like yourself today. That was a big sentence that disappeared from my life. Nobody could say that anymore. Nobody could say, you don't seem like yourself today, because there was no self that they would know, that there was no me that they would be familiar with. So I had to discover what that was. And this is really terrifying because it's an emptiness, and it's also, to me, incredibly liberating.
There's a feeling that you're an outsider, but you're not, because America is a country of people of all nationalities and all backgrounds, and you have a right to this country and an ownership of it equal to everyone else here. You're not an outsider. When I was growing up, I always felt like I was an outsider until I traveled around the world, and anywhere outside the world, everybody identified me as an American. And so I'm an American. You own this country just like anybody else does.
I think the experience, especially on the part of women in a new country, has everything to do with where they are coming from and what they are coming for to this country. And in that sense, I feel that my experience is of a certain kind, and the advice that I can offer or the perspectives that I can offer have very much to do with somebody like me. So my advice would be, make absolutely the best use of these opportunities and resources that you're offered, and the opportunity to work with senior scholars and to invest time in your own scholarship, because it is a very fulfilling and ultimately, I think, a very rewarding experience to be in that position in the US. I think it is sort of true of parts of the world that are outside the West, that we are very aware of what the West is like. And so I remember even as a child being very aware of the United States or England. We basically, our daily life also included a lot of thinking about and exposure to the West. So, the United States was a fairly well-known entity in my imagination before I arrived here. Family members had worked in parts of the United States, and through photographs and just anecdotes in the family, it was the West was never very far away, in a sense, from our imagination. So at one level, I knew exactly what I was going to encounter. But then, of course, when you are actually in a country and in specific places, the experience does turn out to be quite surprising. And for me, the surprise was, first of all, how wonderfully organized large American universities are for international foreign students. There are just everything, in a sense, is in place. but also there is just so much hospitality and warmth that came our way pretty much as soon as we had arrived.
I think I couldn't even have imagined, and definitely I could not have imagined the winters, because I had not been to the Midwest. I really didn't have much of an imagination as far as what life would be like here. In retrospect, I think all I could relate to is my life in Boston, which was sort of my alma mater. So, and life in the Midwest is very different. And I think coming from the Middle East and coming to the Midwest from the Middle East is really it's a big change, much more so I think than going to the East Coast.
I have something funny to share with you. So when I was in medical school in Cairo, when I get bored from using the library at the dorm, I walk down like 2 blocks. I go to the they call it the American Center. They have a beautiful library and a small theater where they show movies. So sometimes I peek and see what they are showing. So I always imagine that the United States is a land of opportunities, and in many ways it is. But the reality, um, to start from scratch was harder than I expected. To build up yourself from zero was harder than I expected, because when I arrived here, I was a certified physician, not only in one country, but in 4 or 5 countries, and to realize that I needed to start from scratch. It wasn't easy, but because I believed in myself, and made it easy.
So I wanted to go to school in Madison because it had a reputation for being a progressive liberal city. And when I came to visit during Visitors Students Weekend, I saw chalk all over State Street where people were protesting and standing up for civil rights. And I found the city just so impressive. So I wanted to have a law school education in a city that was cared about social justice.
Honestly, I was really scared first because I don't know, maybe the movies, social media. I was really scared of bullying and racism, because I don't know, like that's the mainly thing that people says when say United States. But I came here, and I have been really lucky. In high school, like I studied in East High School. There was a lot of clubs, a lot of people who care about different cultures, or the people who are not Americans. And I experienced that in general, people here are really nice, really kind. There's people that has a lot of patience, even more than people that I will know in Ecuador. For example, teachers are really, really, really nice.
And then moving to New York City, that I saw in the movies, and then I did feel like I was in the movie, and that freedom of like reinventing myself showed up. I could not reinvent myself in Switzerland. My identity in Switzerland was very much more defined. And that's not to say that nobody ever in New York City felt like, probably some people felt like, oh, this accent, is she a mail order bride, or like what brought her here? But I didn't feel that as strongly. In Switzerland, my identity was much more defined by where I came from, and in New York, it was not. And so that was more, actually, New York City did look like the place that I imagined it to be, because it was in the movie, and I honestly did feel like, oh, now I'm in the movie. I'm one of the characters, and I don't even know which character I am. I'm going to have to figure out which character that is.